Bangladesh's long-serving Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina is out. A student protest over job quotas quickly turned into a mass uprising, toppling her government.
You cannot rule by fear and by repression.
এখন যেন সূক্ষ্ম বিচার হয় যে শয়তানেরা মারছে তাদের যেন কঠোর বিচার হয়
But in the aftermath, an interim government has inherited a country in shambles, rocked by violence, lawlessness and natural disasters.
The issue of attacks on minorities, particularly the Hindu minority in Bangladesh, has become a flashpoint.
I don't think there is any room for failure of this government. They must succeed, because if they fail, we all will fail.
Can Bangladesh, once Asia's fastest growing economy, bounce back? August 5th, 2024. Bangladeshi Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's official residence, Gana Bhavan in Dhaka, has been ransacked by thousands. The mob had a field day. Some walked away with whatever they could lay their hands on. Some rested in the Prime Minister's bed. The scenes unfolded moments after Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled to India.
আমাদের খুব ভালো লাগছে যে আমাদের দেশটাকে স্বাধীন করা হয়েছে। আমরা একটা ডিক্টেটরশিপ থেকে উঠে আসতে পারছি, আর এটা বাংলার একটা জাগরণ, যেটা আমরা ৭১-এ দেখেছিলাম আর আমরা ২৪-এ দেখেছি। এটা আমাদের কাছে একটা গর্বিত সময়।
On August 4th, a day before Sheikh Hasina stepped down, almost 100 people were killed and hundreds injured as fresh anti-government protests rocked the nation. The protests had been ongoing since July. The total death toll climbed to around 500 until August 5th in the clashes between protesters and security forces. And thousands were injured, according to local press.
Sheikh Hasina is a dictator. She killed thousands of people. I want justice.
Violence first erupted in July this year, when students demanded the reform of a controversial job quota system. In July, courts had reinstated a ruling that set aside 30% of government jobs for freedom fighters in the country's independence. Their descendants could also qualify. This was a revival of a similar quota system enacted in 1972, after Bangladesh gained independence from Pakistan in a bloody liberation war. But historically, these freedom fighters and their progeny barely filled the quota spots.
Even in the freedom fighter quota, the average recruitment was 8.5% all over the years. And sometimes there was almost 0 or 1% of the freedom fighters. When we are not getting that much freedom fighters or their family members or their grandsons and granddaughters to be recruited in the system, we should have gone to 10% or 5%.
And so this was a point that did not go down very well with students. But there was also a larger context to that. Many of the students and people who were entering the job market felt that much of this quota was cornered by supporters of the Awami League, the party that Sheikh Hasina headed.
And when the students protested, Sheikh Hasina's press conference on July 14 angered the students further.
মুক্তিযুদ্ধের বিরুদ্ধে এত ক্ষোভ কেন? মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের নাতিপুতিরাও পাবে না, তাহলে কি রাজাকারের নাতিপুতিরা পাবে? সেটা আমার প্রশ্ন, দেশবাসীর কাছে প্রশ্ন।
Razakar is a Persian word meaning volunteer. But in Bangladesh, the term has been used to denote those who collaborated with the Pakistanis during the War of Independence. Razakars is now synonymous with traitor, and one of the most reviled insults. So, when the Prime Minister mentioned Razakars, it poured fuel on fire.
এটা আমাদের জন্য বিব্রতকর পরিস্থিতি না, এটা দেশের জন্য বিব্রতকর পরিস্থিতি। আমার বাবার জন্ম 1973 সালে, আমার বাবা যুদ্ধ কেমনে করবে? আমার বাবা যুদ্ধ কেমনে করবে এটা আপনারা বলেন। আমরা কিভাবে সাধারণ মানুষ যারা মুক্তিযুদ্ধে পার্টিসিপেশন করতে পারে নাই, যাদের বাবারা যাদের দাদারা, তারা যে রাজাকার হয়ে গেল এটার প্রমাণ কে দিবে?
Students demanded an apology from the Prime Minister. But Chhatro League, the student wing of ruling Awami League, thought otherwise. They attacked protesters inside the Dhaka University campus.
ছাত্রলীগ কিন্তু সেই 15 তারিখ নির্মমভাবে কিন্তু ঢাকা বিশ্ববিদ্যালয়ের এই যে মল চত্বর থেকে কিন্তু তারা নৃশংসভাবে হামলা করে এবং সামনে যে বিসি চত্বরে সেখানে নির্মমভাবে 2 থেকে 300 শিক্ষার্থীদেরকে আহত করে, সেখানে নারী শিক্ষার্থীদেরকে হামলা করে বর্বর।
Then, one death would galvanize protesters further. Abu Syed was a 23-year-old English department student in Begum Rokeya University in Rangpur, 255 kilometers from Dhaka. Arms outstretched, Abu Syed stood alone in the middle of the road, challenging a posse of policemen. He took the first bullets on his chest. Walked a little and then collapsed.
They didn't have to kill him. They could shoot him on the feet. They could even go and arrest him.
The police are not supposed to shoot unless they are given orders to shoot. And the first thing we have been asking everybody, right from the beginning, asking the government to have an impartial inquiry as to who ordered the shootings, why were the shootings done, and to make that report public.
Abu Syed was the youngest in a family of 9 children. His father, Makbul Hussain, describes him as the most gifted of his children.
উচ্চ পদের অফিসার হবি, হয়তো আমার সংসার স্বাবলম্বী করবি, বিয়ে শাদী করবি, এই যে এই ঘর দিবে ধন্য যে ওর উচ্চ ফ্যামিলির লোক আসবি, তার বসবে জায়গা দেওয়া লাগে তো।
Abu Syed was shot on July 16. His family had no idea that he was part of the protests.
ইতিমধ্যে সেদিনে বেলা 1-1:30 দিক খবর এলো যে আবু সাইদ যে মারাই গেছে। কে আসমান ভাঙ্গি যেমন মাথাত পড়ে ওই রকম হলো।
Abu Syed became a martyr for the movement, a rallying symbol for other activists. 17-year-old Anaf Ahmed in Dhaka was inspired to join the protest.
কি অবস্থাটা হচ্ছে, তো আমাকে বলতো যে আমিও তাহলে ভাইয়া ওই আবু সাইদ ভাইয়া মুগ্ধ ভাইয়ের মতো আমিও শহীদ হয়ে যাব, এই কথা আমাকে বলছিল। তা আমি আবার ওকে একটু বকাঝকা করি।
Anaf's mother tried not to let him go to the protest sites, but he was defiant. On August 4th, Anaf left to join the protests as usual, assuring his mother he would be home soon.
6টার দিকে বের হই, যে অনেক সময় দেখা গেছে ও ফোন সাইলেন্টে থাকে, ফোন ধরে না। তো এখানে যতগুলো ফ্রেন্ড ছিল এলাকার মধ্যে, ওদের বাসায় যাই আমি, বাসায় গিয়ে খোঁজ করি যে তোমরা কি ওর সাথে গেছো কি না। তো যে কয়টা ফ্রেন্ড এখানে আছে বলল যে আন্টি আমরা গেছিলাম কিন্তু আমরা থাকি নাই, আমরা চলে আসছি।
While out looking for him, Anaf's father would receive a phone call in the evening.
তো বলতেছে আঙ্কেল আমি ওর এক পরিচিত বড় ভাই, ফেসবুকে ওর একটা ছবি দেখলাম আঙ্কেল, ও ইসলামিয়া, আপনারা ইসলামিয়া হসপিটালে যান, ওইখানে পেতে পারেন। তো ওর বাবা জিজ্ঞেস করে যে কি হয়েছে আহনাফের, তো ছেলেটার কিছু বলে না, বলে যে আঙ্কেল ওখানে গেলেই জানতে পারবেন।
The parents rushed to the hospital.
পরে ওখানে গিয়ে ওই মর্গের যে লোকটা ওনাকে আমরা ছবি দেখাই, তখন উনি ভিতরে আমার ভাইকে নেয়। আমার ভাই পরে দেখে যে হ্যাঁ ওটাই আমাদের আহানা।
On August 4th, the day of Anaf's death, the government imposed a curfew to bring the situation under control. The internet, which was shut down for a few days in July, was cut again on the 4th and the 5th. Thousands of students and opposition leaders were arrested, but nothing worked. Death of Abu Said and other students changed the mood of the protest. People from all over the country came out and demanded justice.
মন্ত্রীরা সব বলে গেছে, আপনারা অপেক্ষা থাকেন, 5টা বাজে আমরা গণভবনে যাচ্ছি। গণভবন থেকে যদি শেখ হাসিনা স্বেচ্ছায় আত্মসমর্পণ না করে তাহলে গণভবনে আওয়ামী লীগের গণকবর দেব ইনশাল্লাহ।
Sheikh Hasina did not get time to make a resignation speech. As protesters closed in on her residence on August 5th, she fled in a helicopter. She is now holed up in a secret safe house outside Delhi, India. For Abu Said's father, Makbul, that his son is now seen as a martyr offers some small consolation.
তারপরে জামাতি ইসলামের বিএমপির মির্জা ফখরুল ইসলাম উনি আলছিল লোকের সমাগম করে ওই বাড়ির পাঁচিটা ভাঙ্গি ফেলছে মানুষের সমাগমতে। তারপরে টুকটাক মানুষ আসে হয়েছে, দেখা সাক্ষাৎ করে, দিনে বেন 3 ফিরে করে কবর জিয়ারত হয়। তা আল্লাহ মনে করলাম যে এটাই আমার সৌভাগ্য, যখন এরকম কোনো মন্ত্রী মরি গেলেও এরকম হয় না, এখন বাহির থেকে লোক আসে কবর জিয়ারত করে না। তা আমার একটা খুব নিম্ন শ্রেণীর মানুষ আমরা, এটাই আমার খুব গর্ব।
All that Abu Said's family now hopes for is justice.
এখন আর চাওয়া চাই কি, এখন যেন সূক্ষ্ম বিচার হয়, যে শয়তানেরা মারছে তাদের যেন কঠোর বিচার।
Yet, this was not the first protest Hasina faced as Prime Minister. So why did the levee of discontent break this time?
Now, time and again, people are voting for me, and I told you that I survived several times. That is also, I know, Allah has given me this opportunity and the people's strength. So that way I feel.
In January this year, Sheikh Hasina won a 4th straight term, the first Bangladeshi leader to do so. The Iron Lady was the country's longest-serving Prime Minister, a tenure which saw Bangladesh achieve stellar economic expansion. The nation's per capita income increased 3-fold in a decade. The World Bank says over 25 million people were lifted out of poverty in the last 20 years. The government also launched massive infrastructure projects, such as the $2.9 billion Padma Bridge across the Ganges.
Sheikh Hasina did preside over a period of robust growth. So it was around 6% annual growth per year since she came to power. And that translated into other economic and other gains. So for instance, on the Human Development Index, Bangladesh actually caught up with India fairly recently. In fact, its GDP per capita income crossed India's also fairly recently.
But underneath the glowing economic numbers, there was a surging current of discontent. Last year, opposition parties like the Bangladesh Nationalist Party had boycotted the general elections, alleging fraud.
It's not just that BNP has called them fake elections. The whole world has labeled the election of 7 January as the fake. Why would BNP take part in a failed election when we already know the results? Even the Awami League knew the results beforehand because they decided, sitting right in the capital in the Prime Minister's office, who would be going to be the MP in which constituency. So even the Awami Leaguers knew it.
Due to irregularities in previous elections, the opposition pushed for the January elections to be held under a neutral caretaker government. This was a previous requirement in the constitution, but was changed when Hasina's Awami League came to power.
Most importantly, they stole 3 elections in a row, and people are deprived of voting rights and other rights, civic rights, political rights. So those have been impinged. And of all the rights violations, I think the violation of the voting right was the most serious one. And that made people more angry because it affected everybody.
But the anger against the government wasn't just political. It also had economic roots.
On the economic front, Bangladesh was doing reasonably well. But the problem was much of the growth was jobless growth. And that led to very high levels of unemployment. There was also serious issues regarding inflation.
Over the last couple of years, the inflation rate has been double digit. In July, the food inflation was almost 14%. So obviously, general people, not only the fixed income earners and low income earners, but also those who belonged to the middle classes, they also saw their standard of living falling, purchasing power declining. We have seen the concentration of income, wealth, consumption was increasing. There were a lot of disparity with regard to distribution between the top 5% and the lowest 40% of the people. Just to give you an example, the difference in income between the top 5% of income earners and the lowest 5% was about 32 times in 2010, and it increased to 82 times in 2022.
And now in Bangladesh, among the educated people, the rate of unemployment is educated graduates. One survey found it was about 50%. So 50% students who was coming out of the university after achieving their highest degree found no job anywhere.
যেখানে আমাদের মতো মেধাবী শিক্ষার্থীরা চাকরির জন্য সুযোগই পাচ্ছে না, তাহলে সেখানে বেকারত্বই তো থাকবে। এখন কতজনের কাছে টাকা আছে বা কতজনের বাবা মার কাছে একটা ব্যবসা শুরু করার জন্য বা উদ্যোগ নেওয়ার জন্য যে পরিমাণ টাকা দরকার হয়, সেই পরিমাণ টাকা একটা বাবার কাছে নাও থাকতে পারে। আমার নিজের বাবার কাছে নাই যে আমি ব্যবসা শুরু করব।
The disenfranchised pinned their economic frustrations on the ruling party. When the authorities cracked down on striking garment workers late last year, who were pushing for higher pay, the government was seen as siding with the rich factory owners.
There was crisis of crony capitalism. That means people were seeing that money is going away, black money is being created, and there is a huge default loan crisis, etc.
The key issue was corruption, abuse of power. They took it as a license. Being in position of power was taken as a license for unlimited, unaccountable abuse of power for corruption and illicit acquisition of wealth and income within and outside the country.
So, when the job quota for freedom fighters was announced, it was seen as the government rewarding party loyalists yet again. But this time, it proved to be the tipping point.
Many of the people, the masses, they also joined this movement because they also had their economic deprivations which propelled them to join the movement. So I would say that both the quota reformation movement and the anti-discrimination movement of the students and the masses, that had very strong economic drivers and underpinnings which was fueled by the deprivations in the jobs market, and also because of the declining standard of living in the face of high inflation rate.
And when the government cracked down on student protesters, it was seen as another example of Hasina's growing authoritarianism. For years, the Awami League had been accused of silencing detractors through forced disappearances and abductions.
There was a lot of human rights violations, a lot of human rights violations. Picking up people, there was detention and arbitrary detention. There was, suddenly people who've been missing. All this was taking place. Weird stories of somebody being found somewhere else. Freedom of speech, that was one of the major things. But that didn't deter a lot of people from speaking. Even, if they were picked up, they still, when they came back, they spoke. And many people who were picked up and they were disappeared, but others spoke. So yes, there was always that fear, but there was always people also who did not fear.
Now, an interim government headed by Muhammad Yunus has taken over. Sheikh Hasina might have been ousted, but the underlying economic woes have not disappeared with her.
And some of the key sectors of the economy are on the edge of collapse, especially the banking and financial sector, because of the loan default culture that was institutionalized by some of the key actors of the previous regime. Many of whom have been arrested now, but doesn't resolve the problem. The economy remains in the ruins.
They are now having to tackle an economic scenario which is not very conducive for their governance. The reserves are at low levels. The exchange rate is under pressure. There is high inflation, and there is the tsunami of expectations which they will have to face and address. So I think that they have their plate full with regard to the challenges, but I think there is also a lot of goodwill towards the government.
But even as the interim government attempts to pick up the pieces of a post-Hasina Bangladesh, there are forces that threaten to tear the country apart. When former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina fled Dhaka on August 5th, Bangladesh was in a state of chaos. There was no functioning administration, no police on the streets. Rampaging mobs looted whatever they could lay their hands on.
But after Sheikh Hasina resigned, the kind of violence and mob frenzy and the total chaos and the total anarchy where anyone and anyone just looted and killed or attacked people was not acceptable. There were quite a lot of slogans and things going on everywhere. Burning of cars, everything that was going on.
In the middle of chaos and turmoil, opposition parties and students selected Muhammad Yunus as the interim chief. Yunus, a well-known economist, had won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2006 for setting up the Grameen Bank, catering to the impoverished. It pioneered microcredit and microfinance in the country.
Professor Yunus is the most renowned Bangladeshi. And in fact, he is one of the most renowned people around the world. I call him a rock star in the world scene. A lot of people have confidence in him. So he was, it's normal and natural that such a most distinguished Bangladeshi would be asked to lead the country in such a critical moment.
I think we couldn't think of any better person than Professor Yunus to take the charge in this context, and we are very lucky, the nation is very lucky that the students were able to persuade him and he has agreed to do so.
Even his predecessor once sang his praise.
In 1996, There was a microcredit summit in New York. In that meeting, Sheikh Hasina promoted Professor Yunus as if he was the Messiah sent from heaven to eradicate poverty. She used that kind of language to praise him, to promote him.
But the relationship would sour. The Hasina government removed him as head of Grameen Bank in 2011. It also filed money laundering and embezzlement charges against Yunus, charges which observers say were politically motivated.
As far as we know, he didn't do anything to harm Sheikh Hasina, but she became so hostile that many people thought that she was bent up on sending him to jail, at least for a day. And that was her resolve, an ironclad resolve.
Hasina had been accused of attacking political opponents in this way. But now, the pendulum has swung the other direction. In the days following her departure, anti-Hasina mobs attacked people and property aligned with the Awami League. The party's headquarters burned.
Unfortunately, in Bangladesh as well as some of the other South Asian countries, we do see a politics of revenge and vendetta. You know, when one government gets either voted out or, in this case, literally forced out. And we are seeing some of that in Bangladesh. Sheikh Hasina has been slapped herself with, I think, more than 100 different charges. Several of her aides and ministers have also been charged of various different crimes. I think, if I'm not wrong, 23 or 24 of her close ministers and aides have already been put in jail.
Then, reports of violence against minorities began to surface. In the weeks following the fall of the Hasina government on August 5th, there have been at least 1,000 attacks on homes, businesses and temples belonging to minorities, especially Hindus, according to Pratham Alo newspaper. The Bangladesh Hindu Buddhist Christian Unity Council has been fighting to protect minority rights for decades.
আমরা আসলে যে কথাটি একেবারেই পরিষ্কার, যখনই সাধারণত কোনো রাষ্ট্রীয় পট পরিবর্তন ঘটে, বিশেষ করে নির্বাচন আর দেশীয়, বিশেষ করে পাশাপাশি আমরা আরেকটা জিনিসও লক্ষ্য করি, ধর্মীয় কোনো উৎসব, বিশেষ করে হিন্দু সম্প্রদায়ের পূজা পার্বণ, এই সকল অনুষ্ঠানের আশাকালীন বা এইগুলিকে কেন্দ্র করে একটি মানুষের ভিতরে একটা আতঙ্ক তৈরি হয়। তারা এই হিন্দু সম্প্রদায়ের উপরে বা অন্যান্য ধর্মাবলম্বীর উপরে তাদের আক্রমণগুলি তারা করে থাকে। আমরা 5 তারিখে যখন বিকাল থেকেই আমাদের কাছে টেলিফোন আসা আরম্ভ করলো, আমরা টেলিফোনগুলি যখনই রিসিভ করতেছি তখন সকলে আতঙ্কগ্রস্ত এবং বিভিন্ন রকম গ্রামাঞ্চলে বিভিন্ন বাড়িতে বা অনেকের বাড়ি জ্বালাও পোড়াও এই ধরনের একটি অবস্থার কথা তারা বলতে আরম্ভ করলো। ওই দিকে আত্মচিৎকার যে আমাদেরকে বাঁচাও, বাঁচাও, আমাদেরকে বাঁচান, আপনারা একটা ব্যবস্থা করেন।
But the issue of attacks on minorities, particularly the Hindu minority in Bangladesh, has become a flashpoint, particularly with regard to relations with India. India has already flagged their concerns. In fact, Prime Minister Narendra Modi, in his recent Independence Day speech, which was recently on August 15th, did express his concern about attacks on minorities.
This was the reality that faced the interim government when it was sworn in on August 8th. It moved quickly to restore order by assuaging minorities' fears. Yunus telephoned Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and assured him that Dhaka would prioritize protection and security of Hindus and all other minority groups in the country. Yunus also visited a Dhaka temple and spoke to the worshippers.
আমাদের কার্যকরীকে রক্ষা করে, সবাইকে রক্ষা করে, প্রতিটি মানুষ আমাদের ভাই, আমাদের বোন, তাদের রক্ষা করে এবং আমাদের একটা শৃঙ্খলা ফিরিয়ে দেয়। বিশৃঙ্খলা, সহিংসতা এগুলো হলো অগ্রগতির বড় শত্রু।
There are fears that extreme elements of society will push the country towards more sectarian violence, whether against minorities or political opponents.
There were forces of subversive nature who were waiting in the wing, and space was created by the zero-sum politics of Bangladesh. And that has accumulated over the years. And they took advantage of the movement and infiltrated the movement. Definitely there are signs of it. And after the fall of the authoritarian regime, there are more indicators of those kind of, at least those various kinds of demands which are not consistent with what Bangladesh is about.
আমরা দৃঢ়ভাবে বিশ্বাস করি কোনো ধর্মীয় লেবাসে রাজনীতিতে, রাষ্ট্রীয় পরিচালনায় ধর্মর ব্যবহার বা ধর্মীয় থাকা আসলে সেটা কোনো রকম যৌক্তিক কোনো কারণ থাকতে পারে না।
The question then is whether the new government can maintain order. For now, a semblance of calm has returned to most of Bangladesh. The anger against the Hasina government has shifted from street justice to the courts. Every day, cases are filed against Sheikh Hasina and her associates for alleged atrocities and abuses committed during their time in power.
Revenge justice cases they filed is based on solid evidence that they will be able to convict the people. And if they are not able to convict the people, that will be a tragedy of enormous proportion. And I think what needs to happen is that the government should hire a panel of lawyers and then help these people who are aggrieved and help this, provide technical help to them so that they can file cases based on evidence, solid evidence, because these people need to be brought to justice.
However, several journalists, some with ties to the Awami League, were also caught in the dragnet. 4 journalists were arrested, and some were charged with murder. Reporters Without Borders and other rights organizations say the charges are spurious.
I believe strongly the people at large don't want mob justice, don't want violation of the due process in the name of justice, in the name of accountability through a process of revenge. That is quite different from what people of Bangladesh would like to see, which is accountability in the due legal process. And that, I think, is being compromised in many ways at this point of time, which is not a good sign for me.
A nation that had a traumatic birth has once again gone through an upheaval. Can the new government succeed in restoring people's confidence and democracy? Can Bangladesh bounce back?
No people have had to pay as high a price in human life and suffering for their freedom as has been exacted from the people of Bangladesh.
A heavy price indeed. 53 years ago, East Pakistan won its independence from Pakistan and became Bangladesh. The country was born amid genocide, squalor, and starvation. Its prospects deemed hopeless. But Bangladesh has come a long way since the dark days of its traumatic birth. In 1971, at independence, it was the second poorest country in the world, according to the World Bank. Since then, poverty has been cut in half. Enrollment in primary school is now nearly universal. Hundreds of thousands of women have entered the workforce.
Over the last 1.5 decade, there was impressive growth rate. It's not just because of the government, it's also the non-state actors, the NGOs, the civil society, the private sector. All combined, there was impressive economic performance over the last 1.5 decade.
But Bangladesh is now facing headwinds. Unemployment and inflation remain high. Reserves are low, while external debt exceeds $100 billion. The interim government has asked the IMF and other institutions like the ADB for loans amounting to $8 billion. And the garment sector, the engine of the country's economy, is faltering. On the back of high fuel prices and falling demand, this July, some factories saw orders drop by 40%. Garment exporter Mesbah-uddin Khan runs one of the largest garment companies in the country. He employs around 16,000 employees and exports $200 million worth of garments, mostly to the European market. Over the last 2 months, his company has taken a serious hit.
We in the group have been struggling last few months, especially last 22 days we could not run a lot of our factory because of the worker unrest. Also due to political unrest, also last few months we have been suffering. So we are really not in a position to respect our commitment to the customer, which is really not good for our sustainable business. Since you cannot give them the goods on time, so they are struggling, in their selling price point. Government is trying very hard, but to grow the garment business further, like we have to give lot of policy support. If garments collapse, then whole country economy will be in a very, very big shape.
Meanwhile, floods ravaged the country in August, affecting about 5 million people. So, new leader Muhammad Yunus has his hands full. The caretaker government has begun their task by announcing key reforms aimed at overhauling the electoral system, the judiciary, the police, and to stamp out corruption.
I think that the interim government has come at a time when there are a lot of challenges that it has to face. House cleaning is one challenge, undertaking reformation of various institutions is another. The third is trying to make it irreversible.
There must be a political equilibrium to create an environment of predictable certainty. If the political equilibrium is not there, then there will not be predictable certainty. So investment will not come, or investment will not be taken by the rich class.
But to push through reforms, Yunus has to work with resurgent parties like the BNP, who will want their pound of flesh after years of suppression by the Hasina government. Already, they are pushing for fresh elections to replace the interim government.
This government is an interim government. They need to realize that they are an interim government. Secondly, the interim government does not have an indefinite time in their hands. If they think they have an indefinite time, they would be again committing a blunder. They should set up the election commission properly, arrange for a free and fair election.
I don't think it is an easy job. It will require great diplomacy, great political art. It will require flexibility on the part of Dr. Yunus and army and the international players, because BNP is already intolerant now, or have waited too long to have power.
Yes, of course, it's a problem of dialogue between the political parties and the people, dialogue between government and opposition, dialogue between government and people, all the stakeholders, not only political parties.
Then there is also the revival of hardline Islamist parties, like the Jamaat-e-Islami. It had previously been deregistered as a political party by the court, but now reinstated after Hasina's departure.
So Jamaat was a party that was seen as pro-Pakistani. It was also opposed to Bangladesh's independence in 1971. And one of its stated goals is to make Bangladesh an Islamic country. So the Jamaat was put under check for most of Hasina's reign, although I might mention that after Hasina fled, the Jamaat has again reopened its office, which has caused some worry both within Bangladesh as well as outside.
Increased religiosity, people becoming devout Muslim or very religious, doesn't mean that they will be extremists. See, Bangladesh is a lot more tolerant country than many other countries. I'm not concerned at this time that the Islamists would be really use their influence to take over this country and turn this country into a theoretic Islamist state. I don't think that's going to happen. That's my belief.
Externally, Yunus will also have to contend with relations with India, which are strained at the moment. Sheikh Hasina has taken refuge in India, a potential stumbling block in India-Bangladesh relations.
So Sheikh Hasina does, her presence in India does make India's position somewhat precarious. But again, foreign policy is conducted on, pragmatic relations and common sense. And India and Bangladesh are neighbors, so Bangladesh can't wish away India. So India's economic relations with Bangladesh actually is on a very sound footing. In fact, India is the second largest trade partner with Bangladesh after China. So economics, in a way, will dictate the future relations. There might be a slight, blip currently, but I don't think that's going to translate into longer term effects.
তারা বাংলাদেশকে দেশ হিসাবে বাংলাদেশের সাথে আচরণ না করে দ্বিপাক্ষিক সম্পর্কটা তারা আওয়ামী লীগের সাথে এক ধরনের দ্বিপাক্ষিক সম্পর্ক আওয়ামী লীগকে ক্ষমতায় রাখার জন্য তারা অবস্থান করছে। ফলে ভারত বাংলাদেশের সম্পর্কটা অবশ্যই সমমর্যাদা সম্পন্ন এবং সেটি মর্যাদাপূর্ণ সম্পর্ক হতে হবে। বাংলাদেশের জনগণের যে আকাঙ্ক্ষা সেই আকাঙ্ক্ষার প্রতি ভারতকে অবশ্যই শ্রদ্ধাশীল হতে হবে।
And in all these, the interim government is on a schedule. The people will expect elections to be called soon. What reforms the interim government takes and how fresh polls are conducted will determine the legitimacy of the next administration.
So the interim government has to ensure that the process of the next elections is seen by the Bangladeshi public as free and fair. That's absolutely essential. The critical challenge is really to ensure the independence of democratic and institutions of governance. The interim government will do some of that, but once the interim government is gone and we have a new regime or government in power, the real challenge is to keep these institutions independent and free from political capture.
If the system remains as it is, if the political landscape remains as it is, or if the status quo prevails, then I'm afraid, I'm talking as an academic, I don't think it will go very far, because you're going to reproduce the same thing.
Bangladesh is at an inflection point. When Sheikh Hasina fled, protesters vandalized the statue of her father, Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, who is revered as the country's founding father. Many condemned the act of defiling such an iconic figure. But perhaps it is also the sign of a country breaking from its past, for better or worse.
Awami League, the party of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur Rahman, has drifted away from that original dream. And BNP naturally is not following that dream. The only positive force is the young people who are not guided by self-interest or political interest, who were actually thinking to have a system which will be non-autocratic. If they come out with their own positive programs outside the control of BNP Jamaat and also outside the control of Awami League and also outside the control of Dr. Yunus and form their own demands, there lies the political hope in future.
I am very hopeful that after such a social movement led by the students and the common masses, things cannot be as they were before. So it will not be easy, but I am very hopeful that this is a new generation which has taken the lead.
I don't think there is any room for failure of this government. They must succeed, because if they fail, we all will fail.
As for the parents of the slain protesters, they can only hope that their children's sacrifice had not been in vain.
ওরা চেয়েছিল এটাকে স্বাধীন করতে, যে সবাই স্বাধীনভাবে চলতে পারবে, দুইটা কথা বলতে পারবে। ওরা যেটার কারণে নিজের জীবন দিয়েছে, রক্ত দিয়েছে, ওটা যেন পরিপূর্ণ হয়।
জীবনযাপন করতে পারছো না বাড়িতে মাওলা। বাংলার প্রত্যেক মানুষ
স্বৈরাচার মুক্ত চাঁদাবাজ এসে ইলে যেন আর জীবনে না হয়, সবাই সুখে শান্তিতে বসবাস করতে পারে, ইসলামী রাষ্ট্র কায়েম হোক, এলেই আমি চাই।